Hello, my name is Taylor. I'm going to be talking about special needs groups and how it pertains to disaster and emergency management. I thought this was super interesting to research, and I hope you agree. So, the first thing that I noticed when researching this subject is that different agencies tend to have different definitions for what qualifies an individual or community as special needs. I went on these different websites like the UN and FEMA, and it was hard to find how they define it. It was hard to find a definition. Um, but when I did find it, they tended to be kind of vague and broad. Uh, in looking at these definitions, though, I noticed a number of common themes that I'm going to talk about in the next slide, and they seem to apply sort of generally. And it looks like all these different agencies have kind of an unspoken understanding of what a vulnerable population is, what a special needs community is. I also found that different actors tended to have different concerns. So the United Nations was particularly concerned with women and children, whereas the state of Florida might be more concerned with people with medical needs, people on medical support networks. But broadly speaking, special needs did not just mean disabled people, and it did not just mean sort of certain demographics in the community. It essentially means everyone in the community who might require some kind of material or service that the rest of the community does not require during a disaster. And I'm going to talk more about that now. Special needs groups include people who are sort of extra vulnerable to the impact or the aftermath of a disaster. This can mean that restoring electricity is sometimes not enough. They might need something else in order to get back on their feet. Um, these are populations living in disaster-prone areas who might require, for example, oxygen on a daily basis, and that's a concern if, for example, a hurricane is coming to their community. They'd need to stockpile or secure oxygen some way. It can also mean people who don't speak English as a first language. This can affect their ability to prepare for the disaster because they might not be able to receive information from an official source, or they might just misunderstand the information and they won't prepare properly, making them more vulnerable. Um, it can also be people with a disability, people with people in prison or other kind of facility like that where they can't be evacuated so easily. Vulnerable populations like children and the elderly who don't have a good support group, or if they do, vulnerable situations where it's harder for them to move and they're more vulnerable to the disaster. The homeless population, there's many other different types of communities. I found interestingly that the Department of Transportation includes people without cars as a special needs group because I think maybe just because they might not be able to evacuate as easily. But I found that interesting that they consider them special needs, so I included it there. In doing my research for this, I spoke to the CEO of a company in Pensacola called the Art Gateway. I used to work for this company, and I'm very familiar with the way they do things in Pensacola. Um, this company provides services for people with disabilities in the Pensacola and Escambia County area. They do things like job coaching, transportation, kind of general stuff, but they also do group homes and home support services and things like that. They're funded through the state of Florida, which means that they're required by law to provide services in a particular way in accordance with the law. So think like HIPAA restrictions and Americans with Disabilities Act. And during hurricane seasons, they have special protocol in place for handling hurricanes that address some of their clients' special needs. They have protocol for other types of disaster too, but hurricanes are what they're like best at. So the law requires that in group homes, general medical equipment like first aid is present in the home at all times. During hurricane season, they require some additional medical equipment. They also require that tenants living in a group home are aware of the response plan and that close relatives, if they have close relatives in the community, those close relatives are also aware of the plan. In a situation in which, for example, somebody requires prescription drugs on a daily basis or something like oxygen, um, the ARC makes sure that those resources are available to the individual at all times, even during the storm and after the storm. Um, in the response and recovery phase, the ARC needs to be able to either provide what they need or get them to a facility that provides those resources, whether it's in the community or outside of the community. They also need to be able to get individuals in contact with their family in a timely manner and things like that. So because of all this, the ARC Gateway works very closely with the state and FEMA and other nonprofits in the area to ensure that their clients receive this care, as well as plan and mitigate the potential harm that a hurricane can have on the population it serves. So they need to have a specific plan. Additionally, ARC Gateway employees are always on the clock. It's a 24-hour company. There's never an hour where nobody's able to be called upon. Support can be continuously provided to the clients for this reason, even during a hurricane or other disaster. So there's never a moment in which an individual living in a group home might be up to their own devices. There's always someone in the organization that can provide some sort of emergency service. Keeping in mind that special needs populations are especially vulnerable, more likely to be left behind according to the United Nations, this is an important component of the ARC Gateway services during a disaster. I'm unsure if that makes it a bureaucratic or an emergent norm, but because it's a nonprofit, but I thought it was interesting. So that's all I got. Here are my cited sources. I'm sorry it looked like I filmed this on a potato in my car, but I hope you found it interesting. I sure did. Thanks very much.